the Christian Bible is very much seeking to replace the Jewish people's firstborn role with Jesus.
Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hey, this is Steve. I would like the rabbi to address Exodus 4:22. Yahweh's called the father of Israel, or Israel is his firstborn son. You can only have one firstborn son, so explain how Adam is the firstborn over all creation, or the son of Elohim in Genesis 1 is the father of Adam.
I want to be courteous. What happens when you read the Christian Bible into the book of Genesis? See, in the Christian Bible, Adam is called the Son of God in Luke chapter 3, verse 38, in Luke's elaborate putative genealogy of Joseph. But that term is not used in the book of Genesis. And I think this question, excellent, but I think typifies what happens to Christians, and that is they read the Hebrew Bible through a christological filter. Now, in the Torah, in the Hebrew Bible, it is God that created. He's the creator of Adam, not that Adam is his firstborn or his son. Genesis does not talk that way about Adam. Adam, for example, probably the most famous of the passages is Genesis chapter 5, verse 1. Ze Sefer Tolos Adam. This is the book of the descendants of Adam. B'yom beroi Elohim Adam, in the day that God created man. B'demus Elohim osa oisoi, and he created him in his image. And it's from this passage that all the progeny of Adam are created in the image of Adam, and that's how we're all created in the image of God. So that's the kind of language we have in Genesis. What's being conveyed by this, Kinderlach? What's being conveyed is that you have a divine spark in you. In some remarkable sense, every one of you listening to my voice right now possesses a spark of the divinity. That's why there's no animal that ever believed in God. When we talk about Israel being God's firstborn son, as quite correct in Exodus chapter 4, verse 22, what does that mean? Like, what does God have in view there? It means if Israel, this nation, is God's firstborn, does firstborn there mean that we're the oldest nation that ever existed? Well, it can't mean that, because there are so many nations that existed prior to the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel really is forged at the very end of Genesis, when Jacob is blessing his sons, bringing into light their unique destiny, and the nation of Israel is really forged as a nation in the book of Exodus. That's what the book of Exodus is very much about. The firstborn nature of Israel is that we are the teachers, we are the Kohanim, we are the priests of the world. And that's the language that's used in Exodus, as you would guess, chapter 19. That should get you, oh, chapter 19, why is that significant? Because that's the incipit, that's the introduction to the Ten Commandments. So the nation of Israel are a mamleches kohanim v'yoy kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, which brings us to our question, what does it mean to be God's firstborn son, Israel? It's in a sense in the way that the firstborn child has a unique responsibility. In some sense, they represent the parents to the other children. They can raise the other children. Most importantly, most germane to our conversation, they instruct the younger children. And that's the role of the Jew. The role of the Jew is to be a light to the nations. The role of the Jew is to play the role of the Bechor, of the firstborn. Not that we are the first nation chronologically to have ever existed, but rather we play the role of the Bechor in that our role, our mandate, is to provide instruction to the nations of the world. That's what comes into view in Isaiah chapter 42, verse 6. The nation of Israel is a covenant nation, a Brit Am and an Or Lagoyim, and you'll find the same exact language coming into view again in Isaiah, but 7 chapters later in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 5 and 6. Now, Luke is using the term that Adam is the Son of God, and as it turns out, the Christian Bible is very much seeking to replace the Jewish people's firstborn role with Jesus, because Jesus is called not once but many times in the Christian Bible the firstborn of creations. In Colossians chapter 1, verse 15. Verse 18, we have the same thing in Romans. We have the same thing in the book of Revelation. We have the same thing in Hebrew. So what's going on here? What's happening here? Well, what's happening here is a real replacement theology. Let's dial back to Matthew chapter 2, verse 13 through 15, where Matthew, in a very striking way, misquotes Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. When Israel was a child, then I loved him, and out of Egypt have I called my son. Matthew famously in verse 2:15 misquotes that passage, so Israel is called God's son. Matthew misquotes the text, rips it out of context, and applies it to Jesus. The context of Matthew 2, Joseph takes Mary and Jesus and they flee to Egypt because Herod the Great is seeking to kill the child. And Matthew, as he does frequently, explains to the reader that this is not an arbitrary event. It was foretold in a prophet that's 700 years older. Now, you know that Hosea is not talking about the Messiah going to Egypt, talking about Israel going out of Egypt. So, all right, so one can toss this up to, all right, the New Testament's being really sloppy. The author of Matthew is doing here in 2:15 what he does in 10 other places in his gospel, and that is to wildly misquote the Hebrew scriptures. And you could do that, and it's true. You'd be correct. But there's something going on here, and that is Israel's being the firstborn. What does that mean now? Israel being the firstborn means that Israel, in a sense, is the priest of the world. Well, Jesus has to replace that. He has to be the firstborn. Hence Matthew 2, verse 15. Hence Colossians chapter 1, verse 15. The Jewish people are the priests of the world. What does a priest mean here? The Chahen means to lead the world. Kingdom of priests. What does the book of Hebrews do with that? It replaces that priesthood that was transferred from Melchizedek, which is Shem, the son of Noah, and passes that on to Abraham. And according to Hebrews, Jesus is that. He's part of the priesthood. He is the priesthood of Melchizedek, not the Levitical priesthood. I mean, that's the whole point of Hebrews. That's the centerpiece of Hebrews. What did Hebrews just do? Hebrews didn't pull this out of nowhere. The book of Hebrews is just a very well-written book. I mean, really well-written. Probably the best written and the best organized book in the entire New Testament. And what it does in a systematic way is replace Jesus higher than the angels. That's how it begins. Joshua, Moses, and the priesthood, and he is it. He's everything. He's everything you want. So what we're putting forward here is that when a person coming from the church, a person coming from Rome, and I mean that in a naughty way, meaning coming from Christendom, is then reading that all into the Jewish Bible. So again, Adam, he's not called God's firstborn son. He's not called God's son. It's God created him. Now, of course, in a general sense, we have in the Torah, we're told in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 1, Bonim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem, you are children of Hashem. We're all children of God, of course, in that sense. But what's happening in the Christian Bible is that Jesus is really replacing Israel. It means Jesus is now the priest. the priest is now the priesthood rather than Israel. Jesus is everything that Israel is. Israel has been replaced. What is happening in Matthew chapter 2, verse 15, where the evangelist misquotes Hosea chapter 11, verse 1, that's not just sloppy writing. That's not just a poor referencing. That's not just ripping stuff out of context. What Matthew is doing is highly sophisticated and fits very well into books in the Bible written before the book of Matthew, like the book of Hebrews. It's important not to read the book of Hebrews or to read the book of Colossians or to read the book of Luke into Genesis chapter 1. Thank you so much for your question.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובר והוא